Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we are slightly short on time, so it was hard to schedule something. So for the first part about the men's race, I'm joined by Issam.
Hey Noah.
And later on, when we discuss the women's race, I will be joined by Twan once again. So today the men's race of the UCI World Cup in Tabor is the first thing that we are going to be discussing today. And actually, for once, we can really say the men's race was more exciting than the women's race. Issam.
Yes, it's maybe a little bit of tendency what's going on, but the men's race during this season of cyclocross have become more and more interesting. It was very cold circumstances in the men's race, also in the women's race, of course. But it was a very close race, to be honest, especially in the beginning. Van Aert, who started a little bit behind, had a decent start, and he was able to manage in the first lap. I think he crossed the line in 16th place. Pidcock was also doing quite alright in his start in the first race of his season. He had a decent start, but you could see at the way Van Aert was coming up even more behind that Pidcock was not going to play a big role in this race. Fortunate for Van Aert, he was going to play a big role. Sveik had a crash on the barriers in lap 2, where he tumbled over the second barrier, hurting himself, and he was eliminated, and he couldn't do the remainder of the race, or at least finished, but not in a high spot. So it stayed pretty close in the pack till at lap 4 it was Vantourenhout who decided to attack. And that attack had no reaction, actually, or at least the reaction was not good enough. And a long time it was like it was going to be a walk in the park for Vantourenhout. But then Iserbyt attacked, following his teammate. He came back to him in the 7th lap, and then we had the last lap was a very tense one because they were together. But the barriers and the energy that was spent from Iserbyt costed him the win, and it was in the end Vantourenhout who got the win in Tabor, with Iserbyt in 2nd, and behind them it was Wout van Aert who got back-to-back 3rd place.
So we really saw that battle there between Iserbyt and Vantourenhout. I agree with what you said. You thought Vantourenhout had it, and then Iserbyt closed the gap of 15 seconds. Real good job. The only thing that I first want to go back to is a bit earlier when Vantourenhout opened that gap. He needed to go against team orders to do that, because if you listened carefully to the broadcast, you could hear Jurgen Mettepenning, I think it was, first shouting to Vantourenhout that he needed to slow and needed to wait for Iserbyt in that group. But Vantourenhout was like, no, I'm not doing this, I'm continuing. And then 2 minutes later you hear the same guy shouting, okay, go full gas now. A bit strange, wasn't it?
Well, yes, I mean, they're looking in that situation from situation, so probably Vantourenhout at that point thought that it was a good idea to attack. Mettepenning, maybe they had a plan beforehand that it was going to be Iserbyt that was going to be the main man for this race. We don't know what they discussed before a race, but it's definitely pretty strange, and also shows that they are not really having a clear plan and vision going into races, and that maybe for the next few races that will come ahead that they need to make clear a clear ruling and a clear protocol of how they're going to do the races, and from situation to situation what they're going to do.
Well, I do think they have a clear plan/protocol, and that plan is just Iserbyt. I think Iserbyt really said, guys, last year I missed out on the win in the World Cup because I crashed there in Namur where he got hypothermia. And this year he said, this year I'm going to win. And then Mettepenning was like, okay, we're going to make Iserbyt win. But Vantourenhout had other plans today. And if you look at the race, I mean, Vantourenhout, Iserbyt, that final 2 laps, they really had a ding-dong battle. But I think Iserbyt potentially could have done more to win. What do you think?
Well, he maybe could have done a little bit more. But I think that based on the results that we had last week, that you can say that Vantourenhout and Iserbyt are not far off in terms of shape, and that's probably the energy Iserbyt had to put in to come back to Vantourenhout, who had a pretty solid lead actually. That just took away so much energy from him that in total, in the end of the race, he was just done at that point, and the energy was just over. Was nothing left, and he just couldn't react on Vantourenhout, who just had his own race, and paced himself to a solid victory.
But if you look where Vantourenhout made the difference, it was always on the barriers. He jumped them really fast, and the ones in Tabor, they are known that they are hard, but this year they were lower and they had a flat top, making them easier, which is a shame, I think. The Parkers had some minor changes, nothing big. They added a bit of a loop to make it a bit longer, but the biggest difference was those barriers. And if you look in the final lap, Iserbyt was the one who was behind on the barriers, and then there the first gap opened. It was about 5 lengths. Iserbyt managed to close it again, but I think if he would have gone over those barriers first, and the opportunities were there before the barriers to take the inside of Vantourenhout, I think Iserbyt could have potentially been able to at least stick in the wheel of Vantourenhout. And then, of course, the question is for how long and what would Vantourenhout have done there. But then I think Iserbyt would have had a bit of a better chance.
Yes, he could have played it a little bit different, but I don't think it was luxury at that point. I think that it was very hard for him to come back to Vantourenhout, and when he was actually in his wheel, maybe at that point he was struggling a little bit. And also what he said in his interview, that he pointed out that the last lap was very hard to stay in the wheel of Vantourenhout. So I think it wasn't luxury what he was doing at that point, and I'm confident to say that the best man had won in the men's race.
I think so as well. I think Vantourenhout is definitely the strongest, and Michael really has the momentum now and the form, and he really made that last step that he needed to go from this always consistent 3rd, 4th, 5th places to being able to win or finish 2nd, and now he's done it, and he's able to win these type of races, and he leads now the World Cup. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he can continue this form in the World Cup and potentially make this his main goal and try and go on to win that World Cup.
I mean, that's all you need in terms of confidence. You need to win that one. You need to win that one race. And when you do so, everything is going to be without a lot of pressure. For him, it's now going to be case to try to not race with any pressure in the next few races, which is going to be hard because it's going to be now the leader in the World Cup, which is a pretty short classification as well. I think if I recall correctly, it's 5 races only, so it's definitely going to be crucial for him to be in the front of those races. And that is going to put extra pressure on him because he has a chance to win a classification at this point.
So then behind those two of Paul Sauze, we saw Wout van Aert claiming another 3rd place in front of Twan and Issam. What is there that we can say about these two riders? I mean, for Van Aert, it looks to be a successful start to his cross season.
It's definitely a very successful start of his cross season. His expectations were very low going into these 2 races, but so he definitely surprised himself. I think for some his results are not a real surprise, but still doing it back to back. In his interview also gave out that he said that he actually gave it all during the whole race. There was no room for recuperation or something. So, and that he said that in the end of the race his conditioning worked really well. Of course he's used to those hours in the mountains and on the road itself, so that played a big factor in the last lap especially. And I think for him, you can really see that he's missing a little bit of explosive power, and that will just come with time. He just needs, I think, 2 or 3 more races, and then he will be one of the favorites to win a race.
Then in 4th place we saw Aert. I mean, it's not really the result that he hoped for, and basically the last couple of races it hasn't been falling his way.
He struggled a little bit this race. You could see that he tried a little bit to take some initiative, but he pretty quickly realized that there was nothing in his legs, or at least there was nothing significant to make something happen. In the end, I think a 4th place is not that bad, especially if you would consider the guys who are in front of him. And I don't think he is that disappointed with his 4th place, but it's definitely not something where he is happy about, and especially considering his first half of the season, he's thinking back at those good days and willing to get those days back and get back to a podium again.
And it kind of adds to what we said some podcasts ago, where we, with exception of the Iserbyt win yesterday, you can really divide this season into 4 pieces. In the first part, you had Aerts, who claimed a bunch of wins. Then you had Iserbyt, then you had Zweek, and now it's actually swinging towards Vantourenhout. He had a puncture yesterday, but otherwise it would have been 3 wins in a row for him.
Yeah, what could have been. Imagine if he would have had a back-to-back victory, and then also with his win in Merckxplas. That would have been a crazy few days for Vantourenhout. Still, I think it's crazy for him. He's now leading a classification and winning a race in the World Cup, and with it's really also it shows that this season is pretty tight, and that if you have a bad day or a bad week, it can be shown pretty quickly, and you lose out big time.
Let's take a look at the entire top 10 then. As we said, it were 4 Belgians on the first 4 places: Vantourenhout, Iserbyt, Van Aert and Aerts. Then we come to the guys who we haven't discussed: 2 Dutch riders, Van der Haar, Van Kessel. 7th and 8th, Hermans in front of Soete. In 9th place we find Kevin Kuhn, and in 10th place we find Dieter Zweek. Once again, just like last week, Dieter Zweek inside the top 10. Another name that stands out to me here is Kevin Kuhn, the Swiss guy from Thormann's cyclocross team. Good performance by him. I didn't expect him to be that good. Of course, he's shown a bit of potential this season already, but this is really a standout performance for him so far this season.
Yeah, and also for Thormann's themselves to be presented with 3 riders in the top 10. I don't think that's a bad performance for that team. I think that they hoped a little bit more with Van Kessel and Hermans to get a top 5. But especially for a guy like Kevin Kuhn, it's a very good result for him. And we just have to see if he's able to do that a few more times this season. I think his previous results were already not that bad. So let's see if he can maintain this.
And of course, a solid performance by the likes of Soete and Dieter Zweek then. The brother of Dieter Zweek, Laurens, he had a pretty bad crash on the barriers, but first I thought he was really hurt. He had something on his wrist, but then he still managed to get up on his bike and get 14th, which was still in front of Tom Pidcock, who made his return to the field today, and I don't think that this is what he hoped for here.
Well, I don't think that it is what we anticipated for as well. I think we had pretty high hopes for his first race. We thought that it would have been a guy that could even fight for a top 5. Today he wasn't close to a top 5, ending in 17th, already two minutes behind. But you could see that he was struggling a little bit with the fast pace in the beginning of the race, and in general with the whole cyclocross, the pace that was going on, the corners, everything was a little bit he was a little bit rusty, I would say. But there is nothing to worry about for him. I mean, you have a whole season ahead of you, and he just needs a few races under his belt to get back to that level what we where we know him of.
And of course, he also had that crash on the off-camber section, similar to what happened to Wout van Aert when he cut off Aerts. Pidcock crashed there, and I think that crash also cost him, because before that crash, he finally looked to get himself in the rhythm, and he was making up places, he was making up time on the leaders, and I think without that crash, he would have not ended 17th, but maybe somewhere a bit further to the front, like back end of the top 10, somewhere around where Dieter Zweek ended in the end.
Yeah. I mean, he was really trying. He was really coming back, actually, and that was all before that crash he had on that section. What was pretty tricky, also in the women's race. But he that is a part of that being rusty, and it's definitely not a disappointing result. Like, you should not expect that much from your first race coming back, like with no races under your belt, while the others all did their races already. It's a result which wasn't what we expected, but it's definitely not a disappointing result, and he just needs time to get in the top 10, in the top 5.
Well, then I think we've had it for the men's race here. Thank you, Issam, for the information, and now we will move on to discussing the women's race. Joining me to talk about the women's race today is Twan. Once again, thank you, Twan, for being here.
Thank you for having me on.
So the women's race today, it may have been a bit more boring than what we're used to, but I have to say we have been spoiled by amazing women races. It still wasn't a bad race. Tell us about it.
So we had a good start by the likes of Clozel, Van der Heijden and Kay. You really saw some of the favorites just taking position behind Clozel, really just gauging the parcours, I think, in race situations. And it was Betsma and Alvarado that took over from Clozel, and then you saw the splits starting to appear. People like Sonnekant being dropped there, and we ended up with the usual 4 Dutch women, and Catablanca Vash and Puk Pieterse. And as we went on, we saw that Kastelein was able to return, but she, of course, dropped again. Brand attacks into lap 3, and Alvarado is the only one able to follow. Catablanca Vash is in the chasing group, doing a lot of the work with Annemarie Worst and Denise Betsma. But at the end of the lap, it is Alvarado who makes a slight mistakes in the off-camber section, and Brand really uses this moment to really press on and make the gap, and that was the race gone. Alvarado would never see Lucinda Brandt again, and Lucinda Brandt would win solo here in Tabor.
Before we get into discussing the results here, I would first like to briefly address the crash in the first corner. 2 riders, Van Anrooy and another one, probably Compton, their steers, they got stuck into each other and they crashed. Van Anrooy was hurt pretty bad. She is undergoing surgery tonight for her arm. Her arm is broken and there is an open wound in her arm. Sven Nys said this is the worst cyclocross crash he has ever seen. So judging by that, it must be really bad and probably season ending for Van Anrooy by the looks of it. We of course wish her a speedy recovery, but there's other things for us to talk about as well, and that is the women's race. If we take a look, Brandt against Alvarado, that's the main picture that we have seen the last couple of weeks, and today it was kind of the same. For me, the crucial moment was the moment that Brandt attacked and Alvarado made this mistake on the off-camber. She was on a small gap, managed to close it, but then was fast after that she was dropped. Do you agree with me, Twan, that was the key moment?
Yeah, and then of course they were nearly at start-finish. Lucinda Brandt went into her aerodynamic position and just consolidated the gap, even made it a little bigger, and started on what was a phenomenal lap, gapping Alvarado. Never be seen again.
Another crucial moment was that time that just going into the field, there was this hill. Brandt didn't manage to get up to the top. She made a small mistake. Alvarado then failed to get up that hill herself as well. And if she would have gotten up there, she would probably have been in the wheel of Brandt. And it just showed after that first mistake and then not being able to take advantage of the mistake of Brandt, that it really was just not enough today and that Brandt was just the strongest. This makes her podium streak currently 11 out of 11. Twan, do you think that there's anything that Alvarado can do to be able to beat Brandt in the upcoming weeks?
I think at this point she has to hope for the form of Brandt to come down a little and to maybe find a little bit of better form herself. I'm not sure how she's doing on that front, but currently Lucinda Brandt is just on another level. Of course, she doesn't even have to go solo on a day like today, but when she pulls this out of the locker, it is going to be a very interesting season.
Behind this too, there was a super interesting battle for the last place on the podium between Worst, Vash and Betsema. Betsema ultimately beating Vash, while Worst the entire race looked to be comfortable there and probably the favorite there to take the third place, but in the last lap she fell off. She lost quite some time. I don't know if anything happened. I didn't see anything happen, so I think it was probably a blow-up. What do you think, Twan?
I the whole time got the idea that only Worst was the strongest in that group. Capablanca Vash was doing a lot of the work, but I never got the impression that Worst was struggling. Eventually, we had Capablanca Vash on a gap as well. It just I didn't see it coming that Henry Worst would be gapped by either of these people. By either of these women. I thought maybe she'd lose it in the sprint, but all of a sudden she's 20 seconds back at the finish line.
Definitely not her weekend, but Vash, super strong performance here today. Really impressive. She almost became the first Hungarian to clinch a World Cup podium in the cyclocross. Shame for her that she just fell beside the podium, but judging by this, definitely a favorite for the Under-23 World Cup, which she now leads. Definitely putting herself down as a name to be reckoned with at the Under-23 World Championships, and in my opinion, it's just a matter of time until she finally gets that podium.
Today was a truly exceptional performance. This is the kind of performance we have been waiting for from her as well. She has really shown this season that she is very strong, even though there were a few things missing at the start of the season, a few subtle cyclocross skills that weren't quite right yet. And today it just all came together. She was very powerful and looked amazing throughout the day. Really took the race to other people as well, not scared to move up past a Brand, past a Alvarado. Just took her place when she wanted.
But in the end, it was Betsema who took that podium. She looked to be a bit worse in terms of performance compared to yesterday, but still, it's pretty good. And I think for her, you could put it down to the fact that it is a double weekend, and maybe she just doesn't like the double weekends that much, or the first one. I think that is probably the reason that she wasn't able to be as close to Alvarado and Brand as in the previous races, but it's definitely not bad, and her starts look to be getting better, so that's something that she can take positive from this race, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think over this weekend she had the benefit as well that there were some slower first laps, so she was really able to get into the race early on, not having to use as much energy in the first lap to move up past all these people. But it is kind of disappointing to me that she isn't quite able to connect with a Brand or an Alvarado. I hope that she would be able to, but indeed it might be down to this double weekend that she just doesn't quite cope as well as the other two.
Let's take a look at the entire top 10 then. We had Brand in front of Alvarado and Betsema. Then we had Vos in 4th. As we said, Worst in 5th in front of Pieterse, who finished 6th. Then there's some other nationalities coming in here, which is quite nice to see. Verdonschot in 7th, Arzuffi in 8th, Kay in 9th, and Kastelein in 10th. So in this top 10, there's quite a few names that stand out. Not the names that we have really seen up there the last couple of races. First of all, Pieterse. Vash rode a really strong race, but the same can be said for Pieterse. Riding a strong race here, finishing 6th, being in the first group for the first part of the race. Definitely good for her, and don't forget, she's 1 year younger than Vash, so this is potentially the next big thing, Vash against Pieterse.
Yeah, I think she has done a brilliant ride here today, and indeed this can be said for many people here in the back end of the top 10. Laura Verdonschot again showing one of those solid rides. Arzuffi, I think the first time in the top 10 this season. Really good to see her back up there. After last season, I hoped we would see her a bit more, but it's gotten a bit worse this season. We don't quite know what that's due to, but it's really good to see her up there again. And Anna Kay as well. A strong start to today's race, and she was able to finish strong as well.
And Magali Rochette finishing just outside the top 10 in 11th. Also a good race by her. And I think a lot of these riders will take positive feelings home from them with their results that they got here in Tabor, and they can be pleased with that and build on that for the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, they definitely should. These are very good performances with pretty much everyone there as well. So there were no people hiding out today. Just a few non-selections on the Dutch side maybe, but certainly a good field.
Let's take a look then at the youth races, because they made a return here. First, we're taking a look at the men under 23s race, because the women under 23, they race with the women elite. Vash leads that in front of Pieterse and Kay. So the men under 23, we saw a race where Rouillet made a mistake in the opening stages of the race that caused Main and Turner to open a gap. These two were gone, but then Turner was sitting in the wheel of Main and crashed, and that left Main just being able to ride to his victory here, taking the win for Tormans Cyclocross team in front of Ben Turner and the Spanish rider Ivan Feo Alberte, which is good to see. And Main, he was expected to win here, and Turner was expected to do well here as well. Rouillet ended fourth. That's the other guy we expected on the podium. It's good to see the Spanish rider here, because at the European Championships we saw him, but he fell back there after a good start. So I think it's good to see some other nationalities. Then okay, yes, the Belgians and the Dutch weren't there, but Main and Turner, they look to be guys that can even compete with the Dutch and Belgian guys, considering their results in Belgium. Then you also had the men's junior race, where it was Matej Straczynski who took the win, from Czech Republic that is, and in front of the Italian Lorenzo Maschianelli from Italy, and Mattias Fila ending third again from the Czech Republic. Then in the women's junior race, they had their first ever World Cup. It was Zoe Bogstedt taking home the win in front of Marie Schreiber, both for the youth team of Akroch. So that team really has some serious talent in there. And then Lucia Bramati ended in third. I think the conclusion that we can draw here, Twan, over all these youth races is that the Brits really have some rocking talent coming through in both the men's and the women's category.
Yeah, I think in the youth categories, it is definitely the British that are confirming themselves as the third cyclocross country at the moment. It will be very interesting to see how these categories will go when the Dutch and Belgian juniors and U23 riders are back with them. It will certainly be interesting. Zoe Bogstedt doing a very good job here. Marie Schreiber, only her 5th cross of the season so far. We marked her at the start of the season as someone to watch out for. Unfortunately, hasn't raced as much as we maybe had hoped, but it's certainly nice to see her back here in Tabor, and hopefully she will compete in the rest of the World Cups.
Well, she not racing that much is completely down to the current rules in Belgium, that there are no racing allowed for juniors. So only the women elite and women under 23 are allowed to race in the Belgian races. So that leaves Zoe Bogstedt and Schreiber out. I do know that they've been training a lot, but it's definitely good to see her. And I think Schreiber and Bogstedt, they are seriously talented, and they ride for the same team. So I think that's really really good to see. Then to round off this podcast with, we are going to give you the results of another C2 cross in Slovakia, in Podbrezova. It was again in the men's race Lander Looks who took the win, his second win of the weekend, in front of Noé Castile, who took his second place of the weekend. The third place, that was a different rider. It was Ondrej Glasia who took third place there. So that's some nice UCI points on the board for them. Let's hope it helps them to get where they want to end. For the women's race, I'm going to get Twan to do some pronunciations of the results. Go on, Twan.
The win went to Amira Maller. The second place went to Nikola Bashgarova. And third again went to Susanna Kurzistala. I think this is the exact same podium as they had yesterday. Yes, it was. Just the time gaps getting a little bigger.
Probably the parkour was a bit harder, judging by the footage I saw on social media. But I don't really know these riders. I haven't really seen them around on this side of the racing, or at least not in the top end of the results. I do see that Amira Meller has got some top 30 results here, 22nd in the European Championships, 29th on the Koppenberg and the Niel. So at least you can get some UCI points on the board here, and let's hope that the other two can also make a trip over here to get some results, but they're at least not making it easy for us to pronounce their names because they're pretty complicated. I think that rounds us off for this podcast. Next week we will be back with the preview of the Super Prestige in Boom and of course the debrief of the Super Prestige in Boom. Issam, he already left, but we are all thankful that he was here today, and of course we thank Twan for being here today once again.
Thank you for having me on.
That rounds it off then. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you want it to appear in your Spotify or whichever audio platform you are listening on. Or if you're listening on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys next week. Goodbye.